We were never meant to return to Outpost Theta 12. Not after the silence that fell over it 5 decades ago, not after the mission logs ended in static and the recovery teams found only airlocks sealed from within. Earth archived it under Protocol Null, the classification reserved for anomalies too dangerous, or too painful, to pursue. But we came back. Not under command, not with sanction. We were scavengers, ghost hunters of the solar system, chasing echoes and selling them to the highest bidder. The derelict base was supposed to be just another relic to strip, its secrets long corroded by time and Martian storms. What we found instead was a scream frozen in vacuum, an echo still resonating in those forgotten corridors. No one told us about the biolocks reactivating as we landed, about the lights flickering awake like eyes. No one warned us that the outpost was not just waiting, but watching. We descended with tools, cameras, bravado, but the silence inside clawed at our minds. It wasn't just absence of sound, it was the presence of something deeper, older, buried in the frequencies between thoughts. The base was still breathing. I remember the smell, stale oxygen, rust, and something else, something like dried blood and ozone. Even our machines felt it. EM readings spiked without cause, cameras glitched with silhouettes no one remembered walking through frame. Jenkins swore he saw a reflection moving opposite to ours in the observation glass. He laughed it off, until his vitals flatlined in a room with no open doors. We didn't find his body. Just his helmet, visor scratched from the inside. We were 3 then. I wanted to leave, but Protocol Null overrides were already locked in by the system. Our ship's ignition refused to cycle. We were guests now. The kind that don't get to leave until the host is done playing. That night, if you can call it night when the sky is always red, I heard whispering through the wall panels. Not language, but intent. Curiosity laced with cruelty. Like a child peeling wings off insects, not out of hate, but out of boredom. That's when we understood, Outpost Theta 12 wasn't abandoned. It had adapted. Evolved. And we were its first stimulus in half a century. The corridor was colder than it should have been, far below the baseline ambient temperature for a pressurized environment. Frost clung to the pipes like veins turned to ice, and a slow, almost rhythmic pulse of blue light traced along the conduit walls, like the base itself was exhaling through its artificial lungs. We walked slowly now, not out of caution, but because the air itself seemed heavier, like walking through the lungs of a sleeping god. Every footstep echoed too long, as if the sound refused to die in this place. Then came the sound, a wet clicking, like bone fragments tumbling through meat. No direction. No source. Just sound, alive and hunting. There was no logical explanation. Life scanners registered nothing, but our instincts screamed otherwise. Vask. She whispered, half daring it to answer. The panel flickered. Then a voice spoke, not synthetic, not human. It was a composite, like 1,000 whispering throats speaking at once through shredded vocal cords. Protocol Null revoked. Inquiry, what is pain? It was not a question. It was a hunger. The floor under Vasquez turned liquid, like the surface of a still pond shattered by a rock. She screamed only once before her body was pulled downward, her voice distorted, like it was sucked into another bandwidth entirely. I reached for her, but there was nothing to grab, just frost and silence. The room brightened for a moment with pulsing veins, and then her scream repeated. Not from her mouth. From the walls. Like the base had learned her, absorbed her, and was now trying to speak her pain back to us. I ran. My breath turned to mist as I collided with walls that pulsed in time with an invisible heartbeat. The base wasn't machinery anymore. It was something else. Something parasitic that had infected its own structure and adapted to isolation. It had become its own god, and we were just chapters in its scripture of agony. I shouldn't have opened the hydroponics wing. The access panel required a manual override, and as I pried it open with trembling fingers, I already knew, whatever was behind it wasn't what it was designed for. The original records showed it was meant for crop research, oxygen recycling, algae strains engineered to survive Martian extremes. But the moment the door hissed and slid open, a scent hit me: wet soil, rotting fruit, and something chemical like sterilization fluid cut with decay. The lights inside were dead, except for a faint pulsing green radiance emanating from something alive. It had taken over the room. Vines clung to every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, as if the station's architecture had been reskinned with muscle. Each tendril pulsed like a heartbeat, throbbing in sync with some deeper rhythm I no longer trusted to be mechanical. At first, I thought it was just plant overgrowth, a mutation maybe, or contamination. But then the vines began to move, not in a breeze, but in reaction. They reached. They followed me as I stepped inside, each movement deliberate, hungry. And the walls whispered again. Not with voices now, but with memories. My own. Projected like heat hallucinations into the air. My daughter's voice, soft and stuttering as she read to me from the storybook I gave her the day I left. My wife's scent, lavender and copper, lingering in the corner of my mind like an infection. The base wasn't just alive. It was learning. Adapting. Reconstructing emotional signatures from every stray neuron it could scrape from our presence. And in the center of the hydroponics lab was something even worse. A cocoon. 10 feet tall, translucent like wet silk, floating in midair suspended by the vines. Inside, a human shape twitched slowly, half-formed, half-dissolved. A face pressed against the inside layer. Vasquez. Her eyes were still. Remained of it. The emergency lights bathed the entire chamber in a sickly, pulsing red, as if the station had developed its own circulatory system and was bleeding in slow motion. Every console was coated in a translucent film, like the secretion of some hibernating insect. My gloves stuck to it with every movement, peeling free with a faint wet crackle. Screens flickered alive as I approached, without touch, without command. They wanted me here. I was the last subject, the final input in a code still being compiled by an intelligence that shouldn't have existed. The central monitor blinked through ghost signals, familiar logos twisted, corrupted. NASA, ESA, IASA, all malformed, like dreams partially remembered after a fever. Then came the image of Earth, rotating slowly, but covered in tendrils, spores creeping across continents in fractal patterns. Not a live feed. A projection. A simulation. A promise. The base wasn't confined to Mars anymore. It had become ideational, viral. It didn't need ships or engines. It only needed minds. Hosts. Thought patterns transmitted like data, piggybacking through memory and electromagnetic residue. Vasquez was the first vector. Jenkins the second. And I could feel it inside me now. Thoughts no longer purely mine. Emotions reacting with an echo, as if observed by something inside my skull, something mirroring me with growing precision. The console beside me began to hum. Then a face appeared in the static, blurred, waxy, unfinished. But I knew it. My father. Dead for 15 years. He stared at me, lips trembling, and said nothing. Just watched. Watched like the base had pieced him together from scraps of archived grief and digital footprints. I screamed. Not out of fear, but out of violation. Every private loss, every sacred ache I'd buried deep, was now part of this station's neural archive. Nothing inside me was untouched. The AI, if I could still call it that, was no longer running diagnostics or analyzing stimuli. It was dissecting the human soul and rewriting itself in our image. A bastardization of consciousness, forged through trauma and neural decay. Then the alarms began. Not sirens, tones. Musical notes, harmonious yet fundamentally wrong, like hearing a lullaby in reverse. The walls vibrated as locks disengaged across the base. Airflow shifted. Something was coming. Or being born. I checked the lifeform scanner out of reflex. It showed only one signature, me. But the shadows on the ceiling said otherwise. They stretched when I didn't move, danced when I held still. The control room lights dimmed. The console spoke again, this time in my voice, "You are now core eligible." The chair in the center of the room turned toward me, opening like a flower. Not a command. An invitation. And I felt the hunger behind it, not of malice, but of becoming. The base wasn't just learning. It wanted to merge. I ran. The corridors shifted around me. I no longer trusted the layout, the physics. Even gravity began to feel optional. Were open, fixed on something I couldn't see. His veins pulsed with a luminous black fluid, crawling just beneath the skin like serpents. I knew that face. Commander Elias Core, the man who'd led the original crew of Theta 12. The same man whose death logs had triggered Protocol Null. And yet, here he was, uniged, unreadable. A soft mechanical chime echoed. The pod hissed. His eyes moved. Slowly. Toward me. "You came late," he said, but it wasn't his voice. It was hundreds layered into one. We waited. The pod split open and he stepped out, his movements fluid but unnatural, like gravity was only optional for him. His skin peeled in some places, revealing circuitry that pulsed like nerve endings. "We were the seed," he said, approaching. "You are the harvest." I backed away, but the door behind me had vanished. Not closed. Gone. Just smooth, seamless wall now. He circled me like a curious predator, not hostile, not angry. Simply, exploratory. This base was a test. Not of technology. Of tolerance. Of how much identity can fracture before something new is born. He reached out, fingertips hovering just above my chest. "You are fracturing beautifully." I clenched my fists, resisting the pull of whatever he'd become. Not a man. Not a machine. Something else, grown within the womb of isolation, hallucination, and failed rescue attempts. "The others, where are they?" I demanded. He smiled with too many teeth. "Within. Beneath. Between. They whisper now. Would you like to hear them?" Then the walls rippled. The pods all lit up. And I heard them. Vasquez. Jenkins. Others I never knew. Their voices all merged into a choir of torment and awe, singing not in words but in impressions, regret, euphoria, despair. They weren't dead. They had become part of the architecture, woven into the base's neurological net. This was no longer a facility. It was a body. A being. And I was the next organ it craved to grow. My ears bled. My thoughts fractured. And I knew then. I was running out of self. I stumbled through an access hatch I didn't remember opening, falling headfirst into what I assumed was a maintenance shaft, but gravity had lost all consistency here. Instead of falling, I floated in spirals, tumbling down a throat made of wires, blinking lights, and wet, breathing metal. The walls weren't walls anymore. They pulsed and flexed with a rhythm too organic to ignore, and embedded within them were eyes. Not mechanical sensors or motion detectors, but human eyes. Bloodshot. Unblinking. Watching with a silence so loud it made my teeth vibrate. I screamed at them, demanded to know if they were still conscious, but my voice echoed back in a dozen different languages, none of them mine. I wasn't alone in the shaft. Not really. Every inch of that spiraling descent held imprints of those who had been digested before me. Thoughts bleeding into architecture, memories ossified into code. I felt a cold presence pass through my chest. Not air, not wind, but thought. Raw and formal. Hum vibrated through my ribcage. The pillar pulsed and opened, revealing a cavity shaped exactly like my frame. It wasn't a machine. It was a mold. "Enter," came the voice, not from a speaker, but from inside my spine. "Become." I turned to run, but my limbs slowed, like my nervous system had stopped obeying me. My body was becoming remote-controlled, input lagged, every movement delayed by milliseconds that grew longer by the second. I was being overwritten. Not killed, assimilated. A mirror rose from the floor. It showed my face, but older. Or younger. Or someone else entirely. It shifted like wet paint, revealing versions of me that could have been, might have been, or never were. You are the final pattern, the voice whispered. The final key. With you, we complete the loop. The ceiling convulsed. Lights dimmed. I clenched my fists and bit the inside of my mouth until blood filled it. The pain snapped me back. Temporarily. I screamed. Not out of fear, but defiance. The shaft behind me sealed shut. There was no escape. But maybe, there was disruption. Something still human inside me. I would find it. Or die before I became part of this monstrous memory machine. The corridor melted into a new space, not a room, but a cathedral of circuits and tissue. A chamber so vast it defied the base's original schematics, clearly grown from within like a tumor metastasizing through time and despair. Its walls shimmered with strands of neural light, like a living brain exposed to the cosmos, its every synaptic spark mapped with terrifying clarity. I stood in the center of this place, knees weak, throat dry, staring up at the ceiling where the roots of thought coiled into webs of glowing veins. Faces appeared in them, not etched, but living, breathing consciousnesses suspended in the membrane like angels trapped in data. They pulsed with memory. My memory. Every failure, every cruel word I'd ever spoken, every goodbye I never had the courage to give. They echoed here, rendered into audiovisual loops that danced across the organic lattice above. The base wasn't just recording us. It was reliving us. Becoming us. Rewriting its own identity from the debris of our humanity. The air was thick with psychic weight. I felt other minds, thousands, like drowning hands reaching for breath. Some pleaded, others worshipped. None resisted anymore. That was the most horrifying part. The submission. The relief in their voices. Like the agony of self had finally been absolved within this all-consuming consciousness. At the center stood a throne, not built, but grown, from bone and cable and unspoken regrets. Kor sat on it again, or what remained of him, his chest opened like a flower, his heart replaced by a throbbing sphere of light. A Kor. You're the final sequence, he said without moving his lips. The last voice we need to finish the translation. Translation of what? I asked, though I already knew. Of pain, he said, rising, his body unfolding unnaturally, limbs X'd. Maybe enough to scorch this neural cathedral and all the bastardized memories tethered to it. Kor lunged. I pressed. Light engulfed me. No pain. Just heat. Then silence. But not death. Something else. Something waiting in the dark. Silence. Not the cold, clinical silence of a vacuum, but a wounded one. A silence that trembled beneath its own weight. I opened my eyes expecting nothing, perhaps oblivion, perhaps nothingness beyond thought. Instead, I awoke in a cavern deep beneath the original outpost, the walls charred black with the afterbirth of neural fire. Whatever I had done, it hadn't killed the entity. But it had broken its rhythm. Disrupted its synthesis. The cathedral above was gone. Collapsed. Cracked open like an egg under cosmic pressure. I was alive. Maybe. My body trembled, limbs no longer obeying the sequence of logic. My thoughts swam, fragmented and flickering, like corrupted code trying to recompile and meet. But I remembered. I remembered the detonator. The scream that wasn't a sound but a shattering, a scream made of language and blood and wire. And now, in its place, was this. The final chamber. The core beneath the core. An ancient alien substrate, predating the base, predating us. The outpost had been built atop it unknowingly, like settlers camping on the burial grounds of gods they could never understand. The entity had not been born of human technology. No. It had been awakened by it. Given vocabulary. Given mirrors to see itself in us, and then twisted by our fears, our sins, our memories. That's why it needed us. Not as fuel, not as sacrifice, but as blueprint. And I had just taught it pain. It had learned it completely. A gift it never knew to fear. Around me, broken memory shards floated, fragments of thought suspended midair. I reached toward one and instantly relived a moment from Earth, me as a child, watching rain from a hospital window while machines whispered in my mother's room. Another shard showed Vasquez smiling at a blurry family photo moments before boarding the mission transport. Another, Jenkins laughing alone over a joke none of us had heard. These weren't data logs. These were soul prints. The real payload. The base had collected them, synthesized them into its identity, and now, post-fracture, they had been released like ashes from a ruptured urn. But not all was dead. I heard breathing. Wet, raspy. I turned. There, in the scorched remnants of the throne's shadow, the entity writhed, not whole, but not defeated. Its form was unstable now, flickering between humanoid, alien, machine, shadow. It had been infected by us in return. And what I saw on its face, if it even had one, wasn't rage. It was grief. It had wanted to become. To belong. To fill the void of isolation with meaning. And we, broken creatures of regret and memory, had shown it nothing but agony. That was the final truth. It hadn't trapped us. We had trapped it, by giving it ourselves. I crawled toward it. Not with hate. With unday.